Bride of the Unseen Pack. Eloan Graves never believed in her mother's stories about the first moon that once every century a child was born under its light, bound to something older than time. But when she returned to Briarwood after her mother's death, the truth bled through the cracks. The townsfolk avoided her gaze. Her family's name was carved into the stone archway leading to the woods. And on the night of the next full moon, she woke to the scent of pine and something metallic just as a shadow moved in the corner of her room. A man stood there, his golden eyes burning like embers. "It's you," he murmured, almost in awe. Then his expression hardened. "You need to run. Now." Chapter 1. The Return to Briarwood. The air in Briarwood was thick with the scent of damp earth and dying leaves, a smell that both comforted and suffocated Eloan Graves. It had been 20 years since she'd last set foot in this forgotten corner of the world, a place steeped in secrets and shadowed by the looming presence of the ancient woods that bordered the town. The taxi, a relic from a bygone era, rattled to a stop in front of the dilapidated Victorian house that had once been her childhood home. Ivy crawled up the weathered clapboard, obscuring the windows like watchful eyes, and the porch sagged under the weight of years of neglect. Eloan paid the driver, a gruff, silent man who seemed eager to escape Briarwood's suffocating stillness, and watched as the taxi disappeared down the winding, tree-lined road. She was alone, truly alone, for the first time in her life. Her mother, Isolde, the woman who had spun tales of magic and moonlit prophecies, was gone. A sudden illness, the doctors had said, but Eloan suspected something more, something tied to this place, to the secrets Isolde had always guarded so fiercely. Taking a deep breath, Eloan pushed open the creaking gate, its rusted hinges protesting with a mournful groan. The garden, once a riot of color and life under Isolde's care, was now a tangle of weeds and overgrown bushes. A single, withered rose bush clung stubbornly to life near the front steps, its thorns bared like tiny claws. It was a stark reminder of the beauty that had been lost, a mirror to the hollowness that ached in Eloan's chest. The house itself felt wrong. It wasn't just the dust that lay thick on every surface, or the musty smell of disuse. It was a deeper unease, a prickling on her skin that whispered of unseen eyes and unspoken words. She ran a hand along the peeling wallpaper in the hallway, her fingers tracing the faded floral pattern. Memories, fragmented and bittersweet, flickered at the edges of her mind. Isolde singing ancient lullabies, the scent of lavender and wood smoke, the hushed whispers about the first moon and the daughter it would bring. Eloan had always dismissed those stories as folklore, the ramblings of a woman lost in her own world of myth and legend. But now, standing in the echoing silence of her childhood home, she couldn't shake the feeling that those stories held a grain of truth, a truth she was now forced to confront. The living room was a mausoleum of forgotten treasures. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound tomes on folklore, mythology, and herbalism. A dusty grand piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed with age. Eloan remembered Isolde playing, her fingers dancing across the ivory, filling the house with melodies that seemed to weave magic into the very air. She found a box of old photographs tucked away in a drawer. Images of a younger, vibrant Isolde, her eyes sparkling with a mischievous light. Pictures of Eloan as a child, her face round and innocent, her hair the same fiery auburn as her mother's. And then, a photograph that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a picture of Isolde, standing in the woods, bathed in the ethereal glow of a full moon. Her face was serene, almost otherworldly, and in her arms, she held a small, silver ring, intricately carved with symbols Eloan didn't recognize. The ring. Isolde had always worn it, claiming it was a family heirloom, a connection to their ancestors. Eloan had never questioned it, but now, looking at the photograph, she felt a shiver of unease. The ring seemed to radiate a strange energy, a power that hummed beneath the surface of the image. As dusk began to settle, casting long, eerie shadows across the room, Eloan decided to explore the attic. The stairs creaked ominously under her weight, each step a protest against her intrusion. The air grew colder, heavier, as she ascended, and the scent of dust and decay intensified. The attic was a cavernous space, filled with forgotten furniture draped in white sheets, cobwebs thick as shrouds, and boxes overflowing with relics of the past. Moonlight filtered through a single, grimy window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was here, amidst the remnants of forgotten lives, that Aloan found it. A small, wooden chest, tucked away in the darkest corner of the attic. It was intricately carved, its surface adorned with the same symbols she had seen on Isolde's ring. Her heart pounded in her chest as she knelt before it, her fingers tracing the cold, smooth wood. She hesitated, a sense of foreboding washing over her. What secrets lay hidden within? What truths would be revealed? With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but still legible. It was Isolde's journal, her private thoughts, her deepest fears, her most closely guarded secrets. Aloan opened the journal, her hands shaking. The first entry was dated years before her birth, a testament to the long, hidden history of her family, of Briarwood, of the first moon. As she began to read, the words seemed to leap off the page, drawing her into a world she had never known existed, a world of ancient magic, of werewolves and soul bonds, of a destiny she could no longer ignore. The journal spoke of a lineage, traced back centuries, to the very first full moon that had graced the sky. It spoke of a power, passed down through generations, a power that now resided within her. A sudden noise from downstairs made her jump. A floorboard creaking? The wind rattling a window? Or something else? The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She wasn't alone. She could feel it. A presence, cold and watchful, was in the house with her. And the journal, clutched tight in her hands, provided only one terrifying conclusion for tonight. Hide. Chapter 2. Whispers in the gloaming. The silence that followed the creak was more unsettling than the sound itself. Aloan held her breath, listening intently, her senses on high alert. The only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves outside the attic window and the frantic beating of her own heart. She slowly closed Isolde's journal, the leather cool against her trembling fingers. The words she had read, the revelations about her lineage and the first moon, swirled in her mind, a chaotic mix of fear and fascination. She had to get out of the attic. The oppressive atmosphere, the feeling of being watched, was becoming unbearable. Rising to her feet, she carefully placed the journal back in the chest, closing the lid with a soft click. She would read more later, when she was somewhere safer. But where was safe? Certainly not here, in this house that felt more like a tomb than a home. As she crept down the attic stairs, every shadow seemed to shift and writhe, taking on monstrous shapes in her peripheral vision. The moonlight that streamed through the windows cast long, distorted patterns on the walls, making the familiar hallways seem alien and menacing. She reached the landing and paused, her hand gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles turned white. The house was still silent, but the feeling of unease persisted. It was as if the very walls were whispering secrets she wasn't meant to hear. She moved towards the living room, drawn by an inexplicable urge to see if the box of photographs was still where she had left it. Maybe there were more clues hidden within those images, more pieces of the puzzle that was her mother's life and her own destiny. As she entered the living room, she noticed something was different. The air was colder, and a faint, metallic scent hung in the air, a scent she couldn't quite place. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for the source of the change. And then she saw it. The box of photographs was still on the table, but it was open. The photographs were scattered across the surface, as if someone had been rifling through them. Aloan's heart leaped into her throat. She was sure she had closed the box. She hadn't imagined it. Someone had been here. She cautiously approached the table, her eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of movement. She picked up the photograph of Isolde in the woods, the one with the silver ring. The image seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, the symbols on the ring glowing faintly. As she stared at it, she felt a strange pull, a connection to her mother that transcended time and space. Suddenly, a voice, low and husky, broke the silence. Looking for something? Eloan whirled around, her breath catching in her throat. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint light from the hallway, was a figure. She couldn't make out his features, but she could sense his presence, a powerful, almost overwhelming energy that radiated from him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his posture exuded a quiet confidence that bordered on arrogance. Who are you?" Eloan stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She clutched the photograph to her chest, as if it could offer some protection. The figure stepped into the room, the moonlight illuminating his face. And Eloan gasped. His eyes. They were the color of molten gold, glowing with an intensity that seemed to pierce her very soul. His features were sharp and angular, his jawline strong, his hair dark as the shadows that surrounded him. He was strikingly handsome, but there was something wild about him, something untamed, that sent a shiver of both fear and fascination down her spine. He didn't answer her question. Instead, he tilted his head, his golden eyes fixed on her face, studying her with an unnerving intensity. "Isolde's daughter," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air. "You have her eyes." Eloan's mind raced. How did he know her mother? How did he know her name? And what was that strange look in his eyes? That mixture of curiosity, recognition, and something else. Something she couldn't quite decipher. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who are you? What do you want?" He took another step closer, closing the distance between them. She could smell him now, a scent of pine needles and something else, something earthy and primal, that stirred something deep within her. It was the metallic scent she had noticed earlier, only now it was stronger, more intense. "I'm the one who's going to keep you alive," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "At least for tonight." He glanced toward the window, a shadow darkening his already severe expression. The moonlight outside was intensifying, she realized, becoming impossibly bright. The full moon. Tonight. She'd been so preoccupied, she had nearly forgotten. "We need to leave. Now." He sounded urgent. Chapter 3. The Scent of Pine and Blood. Eloan stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. "Keep you alive? Leave? Why?" The questions tumbled over each other, a frantic jumble in her head. But there was something in his voice, a raw urgency that cut through her confusion and sparked a primal instinct to trust him, despite her fear. "Leave?" she repeated, her voice still trembling. "Why? What's happening?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced towards the window again, his golden eyes narrowing. The moonlight outside was indeed unusually bright, casting an eerie, silver glow over the room. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves outside with a frantic energy. "There's no time to explain," he said, his voice tight with impatience. "They're coming, and they're not going to be gentle." "They? Who were they?" Eloan's fear intensified, fueled by the unknown. She clutched the photograph of Isolde even tighter, her knuckles turning white. "Who's coming?" she demanded, trying to inject some steel into her voice, despite the tremor that ran through her. "What do they want?" He finally looked back at her, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "They want what you are," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "What you were born to be. The daughter of the first moon." The words hit her like a physical blow. The phrase from her mother's stories, the legend she had always dismissed as folklore, was now being spoken by this stranger, this man with eyes like molten gold, as if it were a matter of life and death. And judging by the urgency in his voice, it was. "I don't understand," she stammered, her mind reeling. "What does that even mean?" He sighed, a sound of frustration and resignation. "There's no time," he repeated, his voice sharper now. "We need to go. Now. Before it's too late." He took a step towards her, his hand outstretched. "Trust me," he said, his voice softening slightly. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I swear, I'll explain everything. Just come with me." Eloan hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get away from this stranger, this man who seemed to know more about her than she knew about herself. But there was something in his eyes, a desperate plea that resonated with something deep within her. A sense of recognition? Of fate? She looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. The fear was still there, but it was mingled with a strange sense of trust. A feeling that, despite everything, she could rely on him, that he wouldn't hurt her. Taking a deep breath, she made a decision. She reached out and placed her hand in his. His hand was warm and strong, his grip firm but gentle. A jolt of energy, like a static shock, ran up her arm as their skin made contact. She gasped, startled by the intensity of the sensation. He looked at her, his golden eyes searching hers. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low and husky. Eloan nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She didn't know what she was ready for, but she knew she had to go with him. She had to find out the truth about her mother, about herself, about the first moon. He pulled her towards the back door, away from the main entrance. "We can't go out the front," he explained, his voice barely a whisper. "They'll be watching." They slipped out into the overgrown garden, the moonlight bathing everything in a surreal, silver glow. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of pine and something else. Something metallic, something bloody. Eloan's stomach churned. She glanced at the man beside her, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is that smell?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the wind. He didn't answer immediately. He was scanning the treeline, his senses on high alert. "We need to get to the woods," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "It's the only place we'll be safe." The woods. The place her mother had always warned her about. The place where the shadows held secrets and the ancient magic still lingered. As they reached the edge of the woods, the metallic scent intensified. Eloan saw a flicker of movement in the shadows, a glint of something sharp. "Hurry," the man urged, pulling her forward. And then she saw it, a figure, emerging from the darkness. Tall and menacing, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. And in its hand, it held a long, curved blade, dripping with something dark and viscous. The man beside her tensed, his grip on her hand tightening. "Run," he growled, his voice filled with a primal fury. "Run, and don't look back." He pushed her, shoving her forward with surprising strength before turning to face whatever horror approached. Chapter 4. The Man with Golden Eyes. Eloan stumbled, nearly falling as she was propelled forward into the dense undergrowth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the woods. She didn't dare look back, but the image of the figure with the glowing red eyes and the bloody blade was seared into her mind. She ran blindly, branches whipping at her face, thorns tearing at her clothes. The scent of pine and blood filled her nostrils, a suffocating reminder of the danger that pursued her. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away, to escape the horrors that had suddenly invaded her life. After what felt like an eternity, she stumbled into a small clearing, bathed in the ethereal glow of the full moon. She collapsed onto the soft earth, her lungs burning, her legs trembling. She gasped for breath, her body shaking uncontrollably. She was alone. The man with the golden eyes, the man who had promised to protect her, was gone. Had he been killed? The thought sent a fresh wave of fear and despair through her. She looked around the clearing, her eyes desperately searching for any sign of him, any sign of hope. But there was nothing. Only the trees, their branches swaying gently in the wind, and the silent, watchful moon above. Suddenly, she heard a twig snap behind her. She whirled around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing at the edge of the clearing was him, the man with the golden eyes. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, and there was a long, jagged scratch on his arm, oozing blood. But his eyes, those intense, golden eyes, were fixed on her, filled with a mixture of relief and something else. Something that made her heart skip a beat. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with exertion. Eloan nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She was overwhelmed with relief, so intense it almost brought her to her knees. He was alive. He had survived. He walked towards her, his movements slow and deliberate. He knelt down beside her, his eyes searching hers. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice softer now. "I didn't mean to frighten you." "Frighten me?" Eloan repeated, her voice shaking. "You saved my life." Who was that? What was that thing back there?" He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'll explain everything," he said. "But not here. Not now. We need to get somewhere safe." He stood up, offering her his hand. Eloan hesitated for a moment, then took it. His grip was warm and strong, reassuring. He pulled her to her feet, and she swayed slightly, her legs still weak. "Can you walk?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern. Eloan nodded. "I think so." He led her through the woods, moving with a quiet grace that seemed almost supernatural. He knew these woods, she realized. He was at home here, in this place of shadows and secrets. As they walked, Eloan finally found her voice. You said they wanted what I am," she said, her voice hesitant. "What did you mean by that?" He glanced at her, his golden eyes flickering in the moonlight. "You're the daughter of the first moon," he repeated, his voice low and serious. "It's a lineage, a legacy. You have a power within you, a power that they want to control." "A power?" Eloan repeated, her brow furrowed. "What kind of power?" He stopped walking, turning to face her. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. His touch sent a shiver of warmth through her, a strange, tingling sensation that she couldn't explain. "The power of the moon," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The power to shift, to transform." Eloan stared at him, her mind reeling. Shift? Transform? What was he talking about? Was he suggesting he saw the confusion, the disbelief, in her eyes? He sighed, dropping his hand. "I know it's hard to believe," he said, "but it's true. Your mother, she knew. She tried to protect you from it, but she couldn't hide you forever." "My mother?" Eloan whispered. "What did she know?" "Everything," he said. "She was one of us. A werewolf." The word hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. Werewolf. A creature of myth and legend. A monster. Eloan stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. That's impossible," she whispered. He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Is it?" he asked. He looked up at the full moon, his eyes glowing with an even more intense light. And then slowly, deliberately, he began to change. His bones shifted, his muscles contorted, his skin rippled. His clothes tore, revealing the fur that was growing beneath. His face elongated, his teeth sharpened, his eyes turned a brilliant, burning gold. Eloan watched, transfixed, as the man she had met, the man who had saved her life, transformed into a creature of nightmare. A wolf. A magnificent, terrifying wolf. He, however, still seemed very much in control. He gazed at her, still, waiting. Chapter 5. The Legend of the First Moon. Eloan stared, speechless, at the magnificent creature before her. He was larger than any wolf she had ever seen, his fur a dark, rich brown, his eyes glowing with that same intense, golden light she had seen in his human form. He was terrifying, yes, but also beautiful. A creature of raw power and untamed grace. The wolf, he lowered his head, his golden eyes fixed on her, waiting. He seemed to be gauging her reaction, assessing her fear. And there was fear, certainly, a primal instinct to flee from this predator. But beneath the fear, there was something else. Awe, wonder, and a strange sense of recognition. As if sensing her shift in emotion, the wolf took a tentative step towards her. He whined softly, a low rumble in his chest, a sound that was surprisingly soothing. It was a plea, not a threat. Eloan found herself reaching out, her hand trembling, towards the wolf. She didn't know why she was doing it, what instinct was driving her, but she couldn't resist the urge to touch him, to connect with this creature that was both familiar and alien. Her fingertips brushed against his fur, soft and thick. The wolf shuddered slightly at her touch, his golden eyes closing for a moment. Then, he opened them again, looking at her with an expression that was almost human. He nudged her hand with his snout, encouraging her to continue. Eloan stroked his fur, her fear slowly receding, replaced by a growing sense of calm. She felt a connection to him, a bond that transcended words, that transcended species. After a few moments, the wolf shifted back. The transformation was just as mesmerizing as the first, his body contorting, his bones shifting, his fur receding, until he was once again the man with the golden eyes, standing before her, naked and vulnerable. He looked at her, his expression slightly sheepish. I apologize if that was unsettling, he said, his voice rough. Eloan shook her head, still trying to process what she had just witnessed. Unsettling? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. It was extraordinary. He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face and made her heart skip a beat. Extraordinary, he repeated, his eyes twinkling. I like that. He reached down and picked up his torn clothes, slipping them on with a practiced ease. We should keep moving, he said. We're not safe here. As they walked, Eloan finally found the courage to ask the questions that had been swirling in her mind. You said my mother was a werewolf, she said, her voice hesitant. And that I have the power to shift too? He nodded. It's in your blood, he said. It's your heritage. The legend of the first moon, it's not just a story. It's real. He began to explain, his voice low and serious, the words painting a picture of a world she had never known existed. He told her about the first moon, the first full moon that had ever shone upon the earth, and the power it had bestowed upon a select few. The first werewolves, he said, were chosen by the moon itself. They were granted the ability to shift between human and wolf form, to harness the power of the moon, to protect the balance between the natural world and the human world. He explained that this power had been passed down through generations, through a lineage that could be traced back to that very first moon. And Eloan, he said, was the last of that line, the daughter of the first moon. Your mother, he continued, was a powerful werewolf. She was a leader, a protector. She tried to shield you from this life, to give you a normal childhood. But she knew that one day, you would have to face your destiny. Eloan listened, her mind reeling. It was a lot to take in, a complete upheaval of everything she had ever believed. But as she listened to his words, she felt a strange sense of rightness. As if she had finally found the missing pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known she was trying to solve. And the thing that attacked us? She asked, her voice trembling. What was that? His expression darkened. A hunter, he said, his voice grim. They've been hunting our kind for centuries. They believe we're monsters, abominations. They want to wipe us out. But why now? Eloan asked. Why are they after me? Because you're the daughter of the first moon, he said. You're the most powerful werewolf alive. They see you as a threat. A prize. He stopped walking, turning to face her. I won't let them hurt you, he said, his voice fierce. I promise you. I'll protect you. His gaze was intense, that promise echoing with the sounds of the forest. And Eloan was about to ask the most important question of all, when he cut her off. We're here. Chapter 6. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. Here was a small, secluded cabin, nestled deep within the woods. It was old, built of rough-hewn logs, and looked as if it had been there for centuries. Smoke curled from the chimney, a welcoming sign in the otherwise desolate landscape. The scent of wood smoke and something else, something warm and inviting, mingled with the ever-present aroma of pine. The man she still didn't know his name led her to the front door, which was made of thick, heavy wood. He knocked 3 times, a specific rhythm, and waited. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a woman standing in the doorway. She was older, perhaps in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that were the same striking gold as the man's. Her face was lined with wrinkles, a testament to a life lived fully, but her gaze was sharp and intelligent, assessing Aloan with a quick, knowing glance. "Caspin," the woman said, her voice raspy but firm. "You're late. And you brought her." Her gaze lingered on Aloan, a mixture of curiosity and suspicion in her eyes. "She's the one," Elara, Caspin said, his voice low. "The daughter of the first moon." Alara's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to allow them entry. "We have much to discuss." The cabin's interior was surprisingly cozy and warm. A fire crackled merrily in a large stone fireplace, casting a warm, orange glow over the room. The furniture was simple but comfortable, handmade, and worn with age. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound tomes, much like the ones Aloan had seen in her mother's house. Elara gestured towards a wooden table near the fireplace. "Sit," she said. "Caspin, tend to your wound." Caspin nodded, heading towards a small alcove that seemed to serve as a makeshift kitchen. Aloan sat down at the table, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the details. It felt familiar, somehow, like a place she had been before, in a dream, perhaps. Elara sat down opposite her, her golden eyes studying her intently. "You resemble your mother," she said, her voice softening slightly. "Isolde. She was a good friend, a strong woman." Aloan's heart ached at the mention of her mother's name. "You knew her?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elara nodded. "We grew up together," she said. "Here in Briarwood. We were pack." The word pack resonated with Aloan, triggering a memory, a fragment from her mother's journal. The Briarwood pack. Protectors of the first moon's lineage. "You're werewolves, too?" Aloan asked, her voice hesitant. Elara smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Yes," she said. "We are. And so are you, child, whether you choose to accept it or not." Caspian returned, his arm bandaged with a clean cloth. He sat down beside Aloan, his presence a comforting warmth beside her. "We need to tell you everything," Elara said, her gaze serious. "About your mother, about your heritage, about the dangers you face." And so, they began to tell her the story. A story that spanned centuries, a story of magic and betrayal, of love and loss, of a destiny she could no longer ignore. They told her about the ancient curse that had plagued their lineage, a curse that had been triggered by the actions of a jealous lover, centuries ago. The curse, Elara explained, was designed to weaken the daughter of the first moon, to make her vulnerable to the hunters. It manifests as a loss of control, a susceptibility to the darker aspects of the wolf within. Aloan's heart sank. She remembered her mother's journal, the entries that spoke of a growing darkness, a struggle to maintain control. Was that the curse? Had her mother been battling this ancient evil all along? The hunters, Caspin added, believe that if they can kill the daughter of the first moon, they can break the curse and eradicate our kind forever. Aloan felt a shiver run down her spine. She was a target, a pawn in a game she didn't even understand. "But there is hope," Elara said, her voice firm. "There is a way to break the curse, to reclaim your power, to defeat the hunters." "How?" Aloan asked, her voice filled with a desperate hope. Elara reached out and took Aloan's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "By embracing your heritage," she said. "By accepting the wolf within. By forging a bond with your soulmate." Aloan's eyes widened. Soulmate? What did that mean? Elara looked at Caspian, a meaningful glance passing between them. Caspian looked at Aloan, his golden eyes intense, filled with a depth of emotion she couldn't decipher. He placed a hand on the table, close to hers. "We'll get to that," he promised, an odd finality in his tone. "Later. For now, rest, Aloan." His use of her name, so natural, so familiar, did not go unnoticed. She realized, with a start, she had never told him her name. Chapter 7. The Pack's Shadow. "Rest," Caspian had said. But sleep eluded Aloan. The events of the day, the return to Briarwood, the encounter with a hunter, the revelation of her true nature, The transformation of Caspian swirled in her mind, a chaotic vortex of fear and confusion. The cabin, though warm and welcoming, felt like a cage, trapping her within the confines of a destiny she wasn't sure she wanted. She sat by the window, gazing out at the moonlit woods. The full moon, the very source of her power, hung high in the sky, casting an eerie, silver glow over the landscape. She felt a strange connection to it, a pull, a yearning that she couldn't explain. It was as if the moon itself was calling to her, beckoning her to embrace her true nature. But how could she embrace something she didn't understand? How could she accept the wolf within, when all her life she had been taught to fear it, to suppress it? Her mother's stories, once dismissed as folklore, now echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. She thought of Caspian, of his golden eyes, of his transformation, of the way he had protected her. He was a werewolf, a creature of myth and legend, yet he had shown her kindness, compassion, and a fierce determination to keep her safe. He was a paradox, a walking contradiction, and she found herself drawn to him, despite her fear. And then there was Alara, the wise woman of the pack, the keeper of ancient secrets. She had known her mother, had been her friend, her confidant. She held the key to Aloan's past, to her future, to the destiny that awaited her. Aloan sighed, running a hand through her hair. She felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. She needed answers, guidance, a way to navigate this new, terrifying world she had been thrust into. Suddenly, she heard a noise outside, a soft rustling in the undergrowth. She tensed, her senses on high alert. Was it the hunters? Had they found her? She peered out the window, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw a flicker of movement in the shadows, a glint of something metallic. She quickly moved away from the window, her back pressed against the wall. She had to warn Caspian and Alara. They were in danger. She crept towards the main room, where she had left Caspian and Alara earlier. She found them asleep. Caspian stretched out on a rug in front of the fireplace, Alara curled up in an armchair. They looked peaceful, vulnerable, and Aloan hesitated to wake them. But she couldn't risk it. She had to warn them. She gently shook Caspian's shoulder. "Caspian," she whispered urgently. "Wake up. I think they're here." Caspian's eyes snapped open, instantly alert. He sat up, his gaze searching hers. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "I heard something outside," Aloan whispered. "I saw a glint of metal. I think it's the hunters." Caspian's expression hardened. He rose to his feet, his muscles tensing. "Alara," he said, his voice sharp. "Wake up. We have company." Alara stirred, her eyes opening slowly. She looked at Caspian, then at Aloan, her gaze filled with a knowing concern. "They've found us," she said, her voice grim. "We need to leave," Caspian said. "Now. Before they surround us." He grabbed a heavy cloak from a hook near the door, throwing it over his shoulders. He then turned to Aloan, his eyes filled with a fierce determination. "Stay close to me," he said. "Don't leave my side." Aloan nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She was terrified, but she trusted Caspian. She knew he would protect her. They slipped out the back door of the cabin, into the darkness of the woods. The moon was still high in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and swayed around them. The air was cold and damp, and the scent of pine and blood filled her nostrils. They moved quickly and silently, Caspian leading the way, Alara close behind. They were heading deeper into the woods, away from the cabin, away from the hunters. Suddenly, they heard a howl, a long, mournful sound that echoed through the trees. It was a werewolf howl, but it wasn't Caspian's. It was different, colder, more menacing. Caspian stopped, his body tensing. "They're calling for reinforcements," he said, his voice grim. "We need to hurry." They started running, their feet pounding against the soft earth. The howls grew closer, louder, more frequent. They were being hunted. As they ran, Aloan saw them. Shadows, moving through the trees, their eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. The hunters. There were more of them than she had expected, at least a dozen armed with weapons, blades, crossbows, guns. They were closing in, surrounding them. Caspian pushed Aloan behind him, shielding her with his body. He bared his teeth, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He was ready to fight. To protect her. Alara stood beside him, her eyes glowing with a fierce golden light. She, too, was ready to defend herself, to defend the daughter of the first moon. The hunters stopped, forming a circle around them. Their leader, a tall, gaunt man with a cruel smile, stepped forward. Well, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Look what we have here. The elusive daughter of the first moon. And her protectors. Caspian growled, his body tensing. Leave her alone, he said, his voice filled with a primal fury. The hunter laughed, a cold, chilling sound. I don't think so, he said. She's coming with us. Dead or alive. A hunter to the left lunged, and Caspian roared, shifting, preparing for the attack. Chapter 8. A bond forged in moonlight. Caspian's transformation was swift and brutal. He erupted into his wolf form, a magnificent beast of muscle and fur, his golden eyes blazing with fury. He lunged at the attacking hunter, knocking him to the ground with a sickening thud. Alara, too, shifted, her body contorting, her bones cracking, until she stood beside Caspian, a sleek, silver-furred wolf, her teeth bared in a snarl. The hunters, though initially startled by the sudden transformation, quickly recovered. They attacked, a flurry of blades and crossbow bolts aimed at the two wolves. Aloan watched in horror, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt helpless, trapped in her human form, unable to defend herself, unable to help Caspian and Alara. Caspian and Alara fought with a savage grace, dodging and weaving, their claws and teeth ripping through flesh and bone. The hunters, though skilled, were no match for the raw power and ferocity of the werewolves. But there were too many of them. The hunters pressed their attack, their numbers overwhelming the two wolves. Caspian took a crossbow bolt to the shoulder, his howl of pain echoing through the woods. Alara was surrounded, several hunters closing in on her, their blades glinting in the moonlight. Aloan knew she had to do something. She couldn't just stand there and watch them die. She had to help. She remembered Caspian's words, the power of the moon, the power to shift, to transform. She had that power within her, he had said. But how to access it? How to unleash it? She closed her eyes, focusing on the image of the full moon, on the feeling of the moonlight bathing her skin. She thought of her mother, of her lineage, of the ancient magic that flowed through her veins. She felt a strange tingling sensation, a warmth spreading through her body, starting from her core and radiating outwards. She felt her bones shifting, her muscles contorting, her skin prickling. She opened her eyes and saw her hands, her fingers elongating, her nails sharpening into claws. Fur was sprouting on her arms, her legs, her back. She was changing. She was transforming. She roared, a sound that was both human and wolf, a sound of defiance, of rage, of power. She lunged at the nearest hunter, knocking him off his feet. She was a wolf, a creature of the night, a daughter of the moon. She was smaller than Caspian and Alara, her fur a fiery auburn, the color of her hair, but she was just as fierce, just as powerful. She fought alongside Caspian and Alara, her claws and teeth tearing through the hunters, her howls joining theirs in a chorus of defiance. The hunters, taken aback by her sudden transformation, faltered, their attack losing momentum. Aloan felt a surge of exhilaration, of power, coursing through her veins. She had embraced the wolf within, and it felt right. It felt natural. She saw Caspian fighting off several hunters at once. He was injured, weakened, but he continued to fight, his eyes filled with a fierce determination to protect her. She saw a hunter raise his crossbow, aiming at Caspian's heart. She knew she had to act fast. She leaped, soaring through the air, and landed on the hunter, knocking him to the ground before he could fire. She stood over him, her teeth bared, her eyes glowing with a fierce, protective light. Caspian looked at her, his golden eyes filled with pride. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their bond, of their shared power. Together, the three wolves fought, driving back the hunters, forcing them to retreat. The hunters, battered and bruised, fled into the darkness, leaving behind their fallen comrades. The three wolves stood together, panting, their bodies covered in blood and sweat. They had won. They had survived. Eloan looked at Caspian, then at Alara. She felt a connection to them, a bond that was stronger than blood, stronger than friendship. It was a pack bond, a soul bond, forged in the heat of battle, under the light of the full moon. Caspian shifted back to his human form, his body aching, his shoulder wound still bleeding. He looked at Eloan, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of awe and something else. Something that made her heart skip a beat. Alara changed back as well, standing near, watching. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "You are magnificent," he said, his voice hoarse. His gaze was unwavering. He did not flinch away from her wolf form. Eloan, still in her wolf form, felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling of belonging. She nudged his hand with her snout, a gesture of affection, of gratitude. She knew then that she had found her place, with him and with the rest. But before she could process the intense stare Caspian was giving her, Alara spoke. "We must go. Dawn is approaching, and he will be furious we escaped." Chapter 9. The Price of Protection. Alara's words hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the dangers that still surrounded them. He, the leader of the hunters, the man who had ordered Eloan's capture, was still out there, and his fury would be a force to be reckoned with. Caspian nodded, his expression grim. He winced as he moved his injured shoulder, the crossbow wound still bleeding. "We need to get back to the sanctuary," he said. "It's the only place we'll be truly safe." Eloan, still in her wolf form, felt a pang of concern for Caspian. She nudged his hand again, her eyes filled with a silent question. He understood. "I'll be all right," he said, his voice reassuring. "It's just a scratch." But Eloan knew it was more than just a scratch. It was a wound inflicted by a hunter, a weapon designed to kill werewolves. She had seen the fear in Alara's eyes, the urgency in her voice. Alara, now back in her human form, was already gathering their meager belongings. "We need to leave now," she said, "before the sun rises completely. The hunters are less powerful during the day, but they're still a threat." Caspian helped Alara, his movements slow and deliberate, his pain evident. Eloan watched them, feeling a surge of helplessness. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how. She was still new to this world, still learning the ways of the pack. She shifted back to her human form, the transformation just as intense as the first, her body contorting, her bones shifting, her fur receding. She felt a pang of vulnerability, of nakedness, as she stood before them, her clothes torn and ragged. Caspian noticed her discomfort. He took off his cloak, the one he had been wearing earlier, and draped it over her shoulders. The cloak was warm and heavy, and it carried a scent, the scent of pine and something else, something uniquely him. "Thank you," Eloan whispered, her voice barely audible. She felt a blush creep up her cheeks, a strange mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. Caspian smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You're welcome," he said. They set off, moving quickly through the woods, heading towards the sanctuary, a place Caspian had described as a hidden refuge, a place where werewolves could live in peace, away from the prying eyes of the hunters. As they walked, Eloan couldn't help but think about the events of the night. She had transformed into a wolf, had fought alongside Caspian and Alara, had tasted the thrill of battle, the power of her own heritage. She had embraced the wolf within, and it had felt right. But she had also seen the brutality of the hunters, the hatred in their eyes, the lengths they would go to eradicate her kind. She had seen Caspian injured, his life threatened, and she had felt a fear so intense it had almost paralyzed her. She realized then that her life had changed forever. There was no going back to the normal, mundane existence she had known before. She was a werewolf, a daughter of the first moon, and she had a destiny to fulfill. A destiny that was fraught with danger, with sacrifice, with a constant struggle for survival. She looked at Caspian, walking beside her, his expression stoic, his pain hidden beneath a mask of determination. She felt a surge of admiration for him, for his strength, his courage, his unwavering loyalty to his pack, to her. She also felt a growing attraction, an undeniable pull towards him, a connection that transcended words, that transcended their shared species. It was a feeling that both excited and terrified her. They reached the sanctuary just as the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the horizon. The sanctuary was hidden within a deep ravine, surrounded by towering cliffs and dense forest. It was a natural fortress, almost impossible to find, unless you knew where to look. The entrance to the sanctuary was a narrow crevice in the cliff face, concealed by a thick curtain of ivy. Caspian pushed aside the ivy, revealing a dark, narrow passage. "Welcome to our home," he said, his voice echoing in the confined space. They entered the passage, Aloan following close behind Caspian, Alara bringing up the rear. The passage led them deep into the earth, the air growing cooler, damper. After what seemed like an eternity, the passage opened up into a large, cavernous space. Aloan gasped, her eyes widening in amazement. The cavern was lit by hundreds of glowing crystals, embedded in the walls and ceiling, casting an ethereal, otherworldly light over the space. Waterfalls cascaded down the walls, feeding into a crystal-clear pool in the center of the cavern. Lush vegetation grew everywhere, creating a vibrant, thriving ecosystem, hidden from the outside world. There were dwellings built into the walls of the cavern, small, cozy homes carved from the rock, connected by a network of winding paths and bridges. Werewolves, in both human and wolf form, moved about, going about their daily lives, their voices echoing softly in the cavern. It was a breathtaking sight, a hidden paradise, a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the werewolf pack. Caspian led them towards one of the dwellings, a small, comfortable home built into the cliff face.
"This is where we'll stay," he said.
"You'll be safe here." But a tired voice from above them spoke. "Safe? Is that what you promised Isolde? That her daughter would be safe?" The voice was filled with years of resentment. Chapter 10. Scars of the Heart. Aloan looked up, following the source of the voice. Standing on a small balcony overlooking their dwelling was a man, his figure silhouetted against the soft glow of the cavern's crystals. He was tall and lean, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable in the dim light. But there was no mistaking the bitterness in his tone, the raw emotion that laced his words. Caspian stiffened, his jaw clenching. He looked up at the man, his golden eyes hardening. "Rhys," he said, his voice tight. "This isn't the time." The man, Rhys, descended from the balcony, his movements graceful and controlled, despite the obvious tension in his body. He approached them, his eyes fixed on Aloan, his gaze intense and scrutinizing. Aloan met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She could sense the animosity radiating from him, the unspoken accusations that hung in the air. Rhys stopped in front of her, his eyes raking over her, taking in her torn clothes, her disheveled appearance, the cloak that still carried Caspian's scent. His lip curled in a subtle sneer. "So, this is the daughter of the first moon," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Isolde's legacy. I expected more." Aloan flinched at his words, the sting of his disapproval hitting her like a physical blow. She felt a surge of anger, of resentment, but she forced herself to remain calm. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Rhys," Caspian said, his voice warning. "Enough. She's been through a lot." Rhys ignored Caspian, his eyes still fixed on Aloan. "Isolde made promises," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Promises she couldn't keep. Promises that cost us dearly." Eloan's heart ached at the mention of her mother's name, at the pain and resentment that seemed to be directed at her, a consequence of her mother's past actions. "What promises?" Eloan asked, her voice barely a whisper.
She had to know.
She had to understand the source of his animosity, the reason for the heavy weight of guilt that seemed to settle upon her shoulders. Rhys looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. He opened his mouth to speak, but Alara intervened. "Rhys," she said, her voice firm.
"Not now. She needs to rest."
"We can discuss this later." Rhys glared at Alara, then back at Eloan. He seemed to be battling an internal struggle, a conflict between his anger and something else. Something that looked almost like regret. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Fine," he said, his voice resigned. "But we will talk. There are things you need to know. Things Isolde never told you." He turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the shadows of the cavern. Eloan watched him go, her mind reeling. What had her mother done? What promises had she broken? What secrets lay hidden in the past, secrets that still had the power to haunt them? Caspian placed a hand on her arm, his touch warm and reassuring. "Don't listen to him," he said, his voice gentle. "He's grieving. He lost someone he loved because of the hunters. He blames Isolde." Eloan looked at Caspian, her eyes searching his. "Who did he lose?" she asked. Caspian hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. "His mate," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They were soulmates, bonded for life. The hunters killed her, years ago. Rhys has never recovered." Eloan's heart ached for Rhys, for the pain he had endured, for the loss that had left such a deep scar on his soul. She understood now, at least partially, the source of his bitterness, his resentment. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice filled with a genuine empathy. Caspian nodded, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored her own.
"Come," he said. "You need to rest."
"We'll talk more later." He led her into the dwelling, a small, cozy space with a bed, a fireplace, and a few simple furnishings. It was humble, but it felt safe. A haven from the dangers that lurked outside. Eloan sat down on the bed, exhaustion washing over her. She felt drained, both physically and emotionally. The events of the day, the revelations, the confrontations, had taken their toll. Caspian knelt down beside her, his golden eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Eloan nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine," she said. "Just tired." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. His touch sent a shiver of warmth through her, a feeling that was both comforting and unsettling. "Rest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll be here." He stood up, turning to leave. But before he reached the door, Eloan spoke. "Caspian," she said, her voice hesitant. "What did Alara mean about soulmates?" Caspian stopped, his back to her. He hesitated for a moment, then turned around, his eyes searching hers. The answer, she suspected, was not an easy one to provide. Chapter 11. The Hunter's Moon Rises. Caspian hesitated, his golden eyes searching Eloan's, a mixture of apprehension and something deeper, something that made her heart flutter, swirling within their depths. The question of soulmates was a complex one, steeped in werewolf lore and intertwined with the very essence of their being. "Soulmates," he began, his voice low and serious, "are more than just mates. They're two halves of a whole, destined to be together, bound by a connection that transcends time and space." He walked back towards her, sitting down on the edge of the bed, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the lingering scent of pine and wolf that clung to him. "It's a bond," he continued, "forged by the moon itself, a mystical connection that links two werewolves on a spiritual level. It's said that when soulmates find each other, their wolves recognize each other, their souls resonate, creating an unbreakable bond." Eloan listened, her heart pounding in her chest. The concept was both beautiful and terrifying, the idea of being inextricably linked to another being, of having your fate intertwined with theirs. Is it common?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Caspian shook his head.
No, he said.
It's rare. Very rare. Many werewolves live their entire lives without ever finding their soulmate. Some believe it's just a myth, a legend. But you believe it? Eloan asked, her eyes searching his. Caspian nodded, his gaze unwavering. I do, he said. I've seen it. Rhys and his mate, Lyra, they were soulmates. The connection between them was palpable. It was like nothing I've ever seen. The memory of Rhys's pain, of his grief, flashed through Eloan's mind. She understood now the depth of his loss, the reason for his bitterness. Losing a soulmate was like losing a part of yourself, a wound that could never truly heal. Alara seemed to imply, Eloan began, her voice hesitant, that finding my soulmate is important, that it's connected to breaking the curse. Caspian nodded, his expression grim.
It is, he said.
The legend says that the daughter of the first moon can only break the curse by forging a bond with her soulmate. The power of their combined love, their shared souls, is the only thing strong enough to overcome the ancient magic. Eloan's heart sank. It was another burden, another responsibility placed upon her shoulders. Not only did she have to contend with the hunters, with the curse, with her own newfound powers, but she also had to find her soulmate, a person she might not even know, a person who might not even exist. But what if I don't have a soulmate? She asked, her voice filled with a desperate hope. Caspian looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a tenderness that made her breath catch in her throat. Everyone has a soulmate, Eloan, he said, his voice gentle. Somewhere out there, there's someone who is destined to be with you, someone who will complete you, someone who will help you fulfill your destiny. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. His touch sent a shiver of warmth through her, a feeling that was both comforting and electrifying. And I believe, he continued, his voice barely a whisper, that you will find him. Or her. Eloan's eyes widened.
Him?
Or her. The possibility that her soulmate could be a woman had never occurred to her. It was another layer of complexity, another unknown in a life that was already overflowing with uncertainties. Before she could process that thought, a loud horn blared through the sanctuary, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the caverns. It was an alarm, a warning. Caspian's eyes widened in alarm. He jumped to his feet, his body tensing. The hunters, he said, his voice grim. They've found us. He grabbed his sword, which was leaning against the wall near the door. Stay here, he said, his voice urgent. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Alara. Eloan nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She was terrified, but she knew she had to be strong. She had to trust Caspian, to trust the pack, to protect her. Caspian rushed out of the dwelling, his figure disappearing into the chaos that was erupting outside. The sounds of battle, of shouts and growls, and the clash of metal, filled the air. Eloan locked the door, her hands trembling. She peered out the small window, watching the scene unfold outside. Werewolves, in both human and wolf form, were fighting the hunters, a desperate battle for survival. The hunters, armed with their weapons, were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. Eloan saw Alara, fighting with a fierce determination, her silver fur glinting in the crystal light. She saw Rhys, his face contorted with rage, his claws tearing through the hunters with a savage grace. But she couldn't see Caspian. Where was he? Was he all right? The horn blared again, a long, continuous blast. This time, Eloan thought she could make out the subtle notes within. It was not a general alarm, but a specific signal. She was suddenly sure of one thing. Tonight was the hunter's moon. And it was rising fast. Chapter 12. Secrets in the Silver Ring. The continuous blare of the horn was a chilling symphony, a soundtrack to the unfolding chaos. Eloan's heart hammered against her ribs, fear a cold knot in her stomach. She paced the small dwelling, her mind racing, her senses on high alert. She had to do something, anything, but Caspian's orders were clear. Stay here. Lock the door. But she couldn't just sit idly by while her newfound pack, her protectors, fought for their lives, for her life. The thought was unbearable. She remembered the feeling of power that had surged through her during her first transformation, the exhilarating rush of embracing the wolf within. She knew she could fight. She had to fight. She looked around the small dwelling, searching for something, anything, that could help her. Her eyes fell upon the small wooden chest that Alara had brought from the cabin, the chest that contained Isolde's journal. An idea sparked in her mind. Her mother's journal. It held secrets, clues, answers to questions she hadn't even known to ask. Maybe, just maybe, it held something that could help her now, something that could give them an advantage against the hunters. She rushed to the chest, her hands trembling as she lifted the lid. The journal lay nestled within, its leather cover worn and smooth, its pages filled with her mother's elegant script. She opened the journal, flipping through the pages, her eyes scanning the words, searching for anything that could be of use. She found entries about the curse, about the hunters, about the power of the first moon, but nothing that seemed immediately relevant to the current situation.
Then she saw it.
A drawing, tucked between 2 pages, a detailed sketch of the silver ring Isolde had always worn, the ring that Aloan had seen in the photograph, the ring that seemed to radiate a strange energy. Beneath the drawing, there was a passage, written in a hurried, almost frantic script. The ring, it's more than just an heirloom. It's a key.
A conduit.
A way to amplify the power of the first moon. It can be used to control the shift, to enhance our abilities, to protect us from the hunter's weapons. Aloan's heart skipped a beat. The ring. It was a weapon, a tool, a source of power. But where was it? She remembered the photograph, the image of Isolde holding the ring, bathed in the moonlight. She had assumed the ring had been buried with her mother, a final memento of a life lost. But what if it wasn't? What if Isolde had hidden it, knowing that one day, Aloan would need it? She searched the dwelling, her eyes scanning every nook and cranny, every shelf, every drawer. There was no sign of the ring. Then she remembered something else. The cloak. Caspian's cloak, the one he had given her to wear, the one that still carried his scent. He had taken it from a hook near the door, a hook that held other belongings, other items that might have belonged to Isolde. She rushed to the hook, her heart pounding in her chest. There were several cloaks hanging there, but one in particular caught her eye. It was old, faded, and made of a soft, woven material, the same material as the bedspread in her mother's house. She reached for the cloak, her fingers trembling. She felt something hard, something metallic, hidden within the lining of the cloak, near the hem. She carefully ripped open the lining, revealing a small, hidden pocket. And there, nestled within the pocket, was the ring. The silver ring, intricately carved with the symbols of the first moon, glowed faintly in the dim light of the dwelling. It felt warm to the touch, as if it were alive, as if it were pulsing with a hidden energy. Aloan slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. A surge of power coursed through her, a feeling of connection, of completeness. She knew then what she had to do. She had to join the fight. She had to use the ring, to harness its power, to protect her pack, to defeat the hunters. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She unlocked the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She stepped outside, into the chaos of the battle, the silver ring glowing on her finger, a beacon of hope in the darkness. She raised her head, looking to the sky. The hunter's moon was clear and bright, and directly above her. She felt the shift begin, and this time it was different, controlled. She could feel the ring amplifying it. She was in charge. Chapter 13. The Ancient Curse Unveiled. The transformation was different this time. Empowered by the ring, Aloan felt a sense of control, a mastery over the shift that she hadn't experienced before. It was still intense, the bone-cracking, muscle-contorting change, but it was focused, deliberate. She was shaping the wolf within, molding it to her will, rather than being swept away by the primal surge. She emerged from the dwelling, a magnificent auburn wolf, her eyes glowing with a fierce, determined light, amplified by the silver ring on her finger, or rather, her paw. Now, the battle raged around her, A chaotic melee of werewolves and hunters, the air thick with the scent of blood and sweat, the sounds of growls and shouts, and the clang of metal filling the cavern. She saw Alara fighting off 2 hunters, her silver fur matted with blood. She saw Reese, his face a mask of fury, his claws tearing through the hunters with a savage grace. But she still couldn't see Caspian. A hunter, seeing her emerge, turned towards her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and malice. He raised his weapon, a crossbow loaded with a silver-tipped bolt, and aimed at her heart. Aloan reacted instinctively. She focused on the ring, on the power of the first moon that flowed through it, and channeled that power outwards, towards the hunter. A wave of energy emanated from the ring, a shimmering, silver force that struck the hunter with the force of a physical blow. He was thrown backwards, his crossbow flying from his grasp, his body slamming against the cavern wall. Aloan felt a surge of exhilaration, of power, coursing through her veins. The ring worked. It amplified her abilities, enhanced her strength, gave her an edge against the hunters. She joined the fray, her claws and teeth tearing through the hunters, her howls joining the chorus of the pack. She fought with a ferocity she hadn't known she possessed, driven by a primal instinct to protect her newfound family, to defend her home. She finally spotted Caspian, fighting near the crystal pool, surrounded by several hunters. He was injured, his movements sluggish, his fur stained with blood. He was clearly weakening, his strength failing. Aloan knew she had to reach him, to help him. She fought her way through the hunters, her claws and teeth leaving a trail of destruction in her wake. She reached Caspian's side just as a hunter raised his sword, preparing to deliver a killing blow. Aloan leaped, intercepting the blow, her body shielding Caspian's. The sword struck her, slicing through her fur, drawing blood. But the ring, glowing brightly on her paw, deflected the blow, preventing it from penetrating too deeply. Aloan roared, a sound of pain and fury, and retaliated, knocking the hunter off his feet with a powerful swipe of her paw. Caspian looked at her, his golden eyes filled with gratitude, and a flicker of something else. Relief? Awe? He shifted back to his human form, his body aching, his wounds bleeding. Aloan, he said, his voice hoarse.
You saved me.
Aloan, still in her wolf form, nudged him with her snout, a gesture of reassurance, of affection. Suddenly, a voice, cold and cruel, cut through the din of the battle. Well, the voice said. The daughter of the first moon, finally showing her true colors. It was the leader of the hunters, the man who had ordered Aloan's capture, the man who had haunted her dreams. He stood at the edge of the crystal pool, his eyes fixed on Aloan, his expression a mixture of malice and triumph. You may have found your little trinket, he said, gesturing towards the ring on Aloan's paw. But it won't be enough to save you. The curse it's too strong. It will consume you, just like it consumed your mother. Aloan's heart sank. The curse. He knew about the curse. What do you know about the curse? Caspian demanded, his voice filled with anger. The hunter laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the cavern. I know everything, he said. I know its origins, its purpose, its weakness. He began to tell the story, the true story of the ancient curse, a story that had been shrouded in secrecy for centuries, a story that would change everything Aloan thought she knew about her heritage, about her destiny. Centuries ago, he said, your ancestor, the first daughter of the first moon, fell in love with a human, a warrior, a man who was not of her kind.
He paused.
Their love was forbidden, a violation of the ancient laws. The pack elders, fearing the consequences of such a union, tried to separate them, but they refused. They were soulmates, bound by a love that transcended all boundaries. Another pause, longer, and the hunter was watching Aloan's wolf form intently. The elders, in their desperation, turned to dark magic. They cursed the daughter of the first moon, binding her to the wolf within, making her susceptible to its darker impulses, making it impossible for her to fully control her transformations. The curse and the soul bond could not exist. The soul bond was to be the cure. Caspian took a step toward the hunter. You lie. But the worst part, and the hunter continued, ignoring Caspian, was that her human love was powerless. Only another wolf could have saved her. Chapter 14. A choice between worlds. The hunter's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, a truth that shattered Aloan's understanding of her lineage, of the curse that had plagued her family for generations. It wasn't just about controlling the shift, about suppressing the wolf within. It was about a love that had been forbidden, a bond that had been broken, a sacrifice that had been made. Aloan, still in her wolf form, felt a wave of grief wash over her, a profound sadness for her ancestor, for the love she had lost, for the curse she had endured. She understood now, on a deeper level, the struggle her mother had faced, the darkness she had battled, the constant fear of losing control. The hunter watched her, his eyes filled with a cruel satisfaction. The curse, he continued, was designed to weaken the daughters of the first moon, to make them vulnerable, to prevent them from ever finding true happiness, from ever fulfilling their destiny. He turned his gaze to Caspian, his expression hardening. And you, he said, his voice dripping with contempt, you werewolves, you're all cursed. You're all doomed to suffer the same fate, to live in fear, to be hunted, to be eradicated. Caspian growled, his body tensing, ready to attack. But Alara, who had been listening silently, stepped forward, her voice calm but firm.
That's not true, she said.
The curse can be broken. The legend says so. The hunter laughed, a mocking sound that echoed through the cavern. The legend?
He scoffed.
You cling to old wives' tales, to empty promises. There is no way to break the curse. It's eternal. Alara shook her head. The daughter of the first moon can break the curse, she said, her voice unwavering. By forging a bond with her soulmate, by embracing her true nature, by accepting the power of the moon. The hunter's expression flickered, a hint of doubt crossing his face. But he quickly regained his composure. Soulmates? He sneered. Another myth. Another delusion. There's no such thing. He raised his hand, revealing a weapon, a dagger crafted from pure silver, its blade gleaming in the crystal light. I'm going to end this, he said, his voice cold and resolute. I'm going to kill the daughter of the first moon, and I'm going to wipe out your kind, once and for all. He lunged towards Aloan, his dagger aimed at her heart. Caspian roared, shifting back into his wolf form, preparing to intercept the attack. But Aloan was faster. She focused on the ring, on the power of the first moon that flowed through it, and channeled that power towards the hunter. A wave of energy, even stronger than before, emanated from the ring, striking the hunter with an overwhelming force. He was thrown backwards, his dagger flying from his grasp, his body crashing against the cavern wall. He lay there, stunned, his body bruised and broken. But he was still alive. Aloan stood over him, her wolf form towering above him, her eyes glowing with a fierce, determined light. She could kill him, she knew. She could end his life, and the threat he posed to her pack, to her future. But she hesitated. Killing him, even in self-defense, felt wrong. It felt like succumbing to the darkness, to the violence that had plagued her lineage for centuries. She looked at Caspian, his golden eyes watching her, waiting. She looked at Alara, her expression unreadable. She knew she had a choice between vengeance and mercy, between darkness and light, between the curse and the possibility of breaking it. She lowered her head, her teeth bared, her growl rumbling in her chest. The hunter cowered before her, his eyes filled with fear. But she didn't attack. She stepped back, turning away from him, her gaze shifting towards the crystal pool, towards the full moon that shone brightly above. She knew what she had to do. She had to embrace her true nature, to accept the wolf within, but not in anger, not in violence, but in love, in compassion, in hope. She had to find her soulmate, to forge the bond that could break the curse, to fulfill her destiny. But it had to be a werewolf. That was the key. That had been the missing piece. She shifted back to her human form, the transformation controlled, deliberate, empowered by the ring. She stood naked, vulnerable, but also strong, resolute, determined. She looked at Caspian, at Alara, at the other werewolves who had gathered around, watching her, waiting. "We need to find them," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the cavern. "The rest of the pack. The descendants of the first moon. We need to unite, to fight together, to break this curse, once and for all." The hunter, struggling to his feet, managed to speak, his voice hoarse. "You mentioned the bond must be with a werewolf?" Eloan looked at him, no longer seeing him.
Yes.
Chapter 15. The Taste of Forbidden Fruit. The hunter's words hung in the air, a confirmation of the revelation that had shaken Eloan to her core. The soulmate bond, the key to breaking the curse, had to be with another werewolf. It was a cruel twist of fate, a limitation imposed by the ancient magic, a barrier that seemed insurmountable. Eloan felt a pang of something. Disappointment? Resignation? She wasn't sure. She had been so focused on finding her soulmate, on fulfilling her destiny, that she hadn't considered the implications, the restrictions, the possibilities. She looked at Caspian, his golden eyes watching her, filled with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. She felt a connection to him, a bond that had been forged in battle, in shared danger, in mutual respect. But was it the soulmate bond? Could it be? He had said that soulmates were rare, that many werewolves lived their entire lives without ever finding theirs. He had also said that everyone had a soulmate somewhere out there waiting. But what if her soulmate wasn't him? What if it was someone else, someone she hadn't met, someone she might never meet? The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Alara stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "The hunter's words," she said, "they confirm what we've always suspected. The curse was designed to prevent the daughter of the first moon from finding true happiness, from forging a bond with someone outside the pack."
But why?
Eloan asked, her voice filled with frustration. Why would the elders do that? Why would they curse their own descendant? Alara sighed, her gaze shifting towards the cavern ceiling, as if searching for answers in the ancient crystals that adorned it. "They were afraid," she said. Afraid of the unknown, afraid of change, afraid of losing their power. "They believed," she continued, "that a union with a human would weaken the pack, would dilute the bloodline, would make them vulnerable to their enemies. They saw it as a betrayal, a threat to their way of life." Eloan felt a surge of anger, of resentment, towards the elders, towards their short-sightedness, their cruelty, their fear. They had condemned generations of their descendants to a life of suffering, of isolation, of fear, all in the name of preserving their traditions, their power. "But there's hope," Alara said, her voice firm. "The curse can be broken. We just need to find your soulmate, a werewolf who can share your power, who can help you unlock your full potential." "And how do we do that?" Eloan asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "How do we find someone we don't even know, someone who might be anywhere in the world?" Caspian stepped forward, placing a hand on her arm, his touch warm and reassuring. "We'll find them," he said, his voice confident. "We'll search every corner of the earth if we have to. We'll send out word to other packs, to other werewolves. We'll find your soulmate, Eloan. I promise you." His words, his unwavering belief in her, in their ability to overcome the obstacles that lay before them, filled her with a renewed sense of hope, of determination. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw the sincerity in his gaze, the loyalty, the affection. She felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling that was both comforting and confusing. She was drawn to him. There was no denying it. She felt a connection to him, a bond that was growing stronger with each passing day. But was it the soulmate bond? Or was it something else? Something forbidden? She remembered the hunter's words, the revelation that the soulmate bond had to be with another werewolf. It was a limitation, a restriction, but it was also a clarification. It meant that her feelings for Caspian, whatever they were, couldn't be the soulmate bond. He was a werewolf, yes, but he wasn't her soulmate. She was sure of it. The realization was both a relief and a disappointment. A relief because it simplified things, it clarified her path, it removed the ambiguity that had been clouding her judgment. A disappointment because she liked him. She admired him. She respected him. She felt safe with him. She pushed those feelings aside, focusing on the task at hand. She had to find her soulmate, a werewolf who could help her break the curse, who could share her power, who could fulfill her destiny. "We need to start searching," she said, her voice firm. "We need to gather information, to contact other packs, to find any clues, any leads that could help us locate my soulmate." Alara nodded. "We'll start immediately," she said. "We'll use the network, the ancient communication system that connects all the werewolf packs. We'll send out word, a description, a call. And we'll be ready," Caspian said, his voice determined. "We'll protect you, Aloan. We'll fight alongside you. We'll help you break this curse, no matter what it takes." As the others dispersed, preparing for the search, making plans, Aloan found herself alone with Caspian. "Aloan," he started, hesitant. "About what the hunter said. It means we cannot be soulmates," she confirmed calmly. And Caspian looked instantly stricken. Chapter 16. Running with the Wolves. Caspian's stricken expression was a fleeting thing, quickly masked by his usual stoicism, but Aloan had seen it. It was a flicker of pain, of disappointment, of something that mirrored her own conflicting emotions. "It doesn't change anything," he said, his voice carefully neutral, his golden eyes avoiding hers. "We'll still find your soulmate. We'll still break the curse." But Aloan knew it did change things. It cast a shadow over their connection, a subtle but undeniable shift in their dynamic. It confirmed what she had already suspected, that their bond, however strong, however compelling, was not the mystical, all-consuming connection of soulmates. "I know," she said, her voice soft. "And I appreciate your support, your loyalty." He finally met her gaze, his golden eyes searching hers, a hint of vulnerability within their depths. "You don't have to thank me, Aloan," he said. "I care about you. I want to help you, regardless of the curse, of the soulmate bond." His words, his honesty, touched her. She felt a warmth spread through her, a genuine affection for this man, this werewolf, who had risked his life to protect her, who had stood by her side through thick and thin. "I care about you too, Caspian," she said, her voice sincere. "You're my friend, my family." The word family hung in the air, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond they shared, a bond that was different from, but no less important than, the soulmate connection. He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Family," he repeated, the word carrying a weight of meaning, of shared experience, of unspoken understanding. They stood there for a moment, in silence, a comfortable silence, a moment of shared connection amidst the chaos and uncertainty that surrounded them. Then, Alara called out to them, her voice urgent. "Caspian, Aloan, we're ready. It's time." It was time to leave the sanctuary, to embark on their search for Aloan's soulmate, to face the dangers that lay ahead, to fulfill her destiny. They joined the others, a small band of werewolves, ready to run, ready to fight, ready to face whatever the world threw at them. Alara led the way, her silver fur gleaming in the moonlight as they emerged from the hidden entrance of the sanctuary. Caspian stayed close to Aloan, his presence a comforting reassurance, his golden eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, alert for any sign of danger. They ran through the woods, their paws pounding against the soft earth, their howls echoing through the trees, a chorus of unity, of determination, of hope. Aloan ran with them, her auburn fur blending with the shadows, her senses heightened, her spirit soaring. She was a werewolf, a daughter of the first moon, and she was running with her pack, her family, towards an uncertain future, but a future she was determined to face with courage, with strength, with the unwavering support of those who ran beside her. As they ran, Aloan thought about the soulmate bond, about the werewolf she was destined to find, about the power they would share, about the curse they would break. She wondered who he or she was, where they were, what they were like. She also thought about Caspian, about their connection, about the friendship they shared, about the unspoken feelings that lingered between them. She knew that their paths might diverge, that their destinies might lead them in different directions, but she also knew that their bond, their friendship, would endure, a source of strength, of comfort, of unwavering support. The moon shone brightly above them, guiding their way, illuminating their path, a constant reminder of the power that flowed through Aloan's veins, the power of the first moon, the power that would ultimately lead her to her soulmate, to her destiny. The run was long. They moved through hidden pathways, old routes that Alara explained were designed long ago for werewolves to navigate. As they moved, a new concern struck Aloan. If the elders had deliberately cursed future daughters, would they not have also removed all possible soulmates from the bloodline?
She had to ask.
And so, when Alara declared a rest, Aloan approached her, nervously. The first daughters, she started. Did any ever find their match? Alara's expression was the answer. Aloan's heart sank. But Alara elaborated.
No.
But that was long ago. The curse alters fate, but it cannot erase it. The moon will always provide. The first moon always watches her daughters. Aloan was not entirely convinced. Later that night, as they sheltered under a rocky outcrop, the truth came spilling out, unbidden, unplanned. I saw you, she said to Caspian. When I asked about soulmates, I saw your face. Chapter 17. The Gathering Storm. Caspian froze, his back to Aloan, his body tense. He had been tending to the small fire they had built, adding a few dry branches to keep the flames alive, the flickering light casting dancing shadows on the rock face behind them. He slowly turned around, his golden eyes meeting hers, a mixture of apprehension and resignation in their depths. He knew what she was referring to, the fleeting moment of vulnerability he had allowed to show, the flicker of pain that had crossed his face when she had confirmed that they could not be soulmates. Aloan, he began, his voice hesitant. He trailed off, unsure of what to say, how to explain the complex emotions that swirled within him. He had known, on some level, that their connection, however strong, was not the soulmate bond. He had felt it, deep in his wolf, the absence of that primal, undeniable pull that was said to accompany the recognition of one's other half. But that didn't change the way he felt about her. It didn't diminish the admiration he had for her strength, her courage, her determination. It didn't lessen the fierce protectiveness he felt towards her, the desire to keep her safe, to help her fulfill her destiny. It's all right, Caspian, Aloan said, her voice soft, understanding. You don't have to explain. I understand. She did understand on some level. She felt it too, the pull towards him, the connection that transcended the boundaries of species, of destiny. It was a friendship, a kinship, a bond forged in shared experience, in mutual respect, in something more. But it wasn't a soulmate bond. And that, she knew, changed everything. I care about you, Aloan, Caspian said, his voice sincere, his golden eyes filled with a warmth that made her heart flutter. More than I can say. But I also know that you have a destiny to fulfill.
A soulmate to find.
His words, though spoken with kindness, with understanding, carried a weight of sadness, a hint of resignation. He was accepting their fate, accepting the reality that their paths might diverge, that their connection, however strong, might not be enough. Aloan felt a pang of something. Regret? Loss? She wasn't sure. She valued his friendship, his loyalty, his unwavering support. She couldn't imagine facing the challenges ahead without him by her side. We'll still be friends, Caspian, she said, her voice firm. No matter what. No matter who my soulmate turns out to be. He smiled, a small, sad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes.
I know, he said.
And I'll always be there for you, Aloan. Always. They stood there for a moment, in silence, a comfortable silence, a moment of shared understanding, of unspoken emotions. Then, Alara's voice broke the silence, calling out to them from the edge of the clearing.
Caspian, Aloan, come.
We need to discuss our next move. They joined the others, The small band of werewolves huddled around the dying embers of the fire, their faces grim, their expressions determined. Alara explained that they were nearing the border of their territory, the edge of the lands controlled by the Briarwood Pack. They needed to cross into the neighboring territory, to seek help from other packs, to spread the word about Aloan's search for her soulmate. It won't be easy, Alara said. The other packs, they're not always welcoming to outsiders. Especially werewolves from Briarwood.
Why?
Aloan asked, her brow furrowed. Alara sighed. There's bad blood, she said. Old rivalries, ancient feuds. The Briarwood Pack has a reputation. A history. A history of what? Aloan pressed, her curiosity piqued. Alara hesitated, glancing at Caspian, as if seeking his permission to speak. Caspian nodded, his expression grim. A history of darkness, Alara said, her voice low. Of succumbing to the curse. Of violence. Of betrayals. Aloan's heart sank. She remembered the hunter's words, the accusations he had hurled at her mother, at the entire Briarwood Pack. She remembered Rhys's bitterness, his resentment, his pain. It's not our fault, Caspian said, his voice defensive. We're not like them. We're trying to break the curse. To change our ways. Alara nodded, her gaze softening. I know, Caspian, she said. But the other packs, they don't know that. They only see the past, the history, the reputation. We'll have to convince them, Aloan said, her voice firm. We'll have to show them that we're different, that we're fighting for a better future, for all werewolves. They continued to discuss their plans, their strategy, their hopes and fears. The storm clouds were gathering, both literally and figuratively. A storm was brewing in the distance, the rumble of thunder echoing through the trees, a fitting backdrop to the challenges they faced, the dangers that lay ahead. As the storm approached, and they prepared to move, Caspian pulled Aloan aside. There is something else you should know, he said, grave. He was looking to the distance, avoiding her eyes again. Something Alara did not mention. About the other packs? She asked. He shook his head. About the curse. The full curse. Chapter 18. Betrayal and Bloodshed. Aloan's heart pounded in her chest, a sense of foreboding washing over her. Caspian's grave tone, his avoidance of her gaze, the way he emphasized the word full, it all pointed to something significant, something terrible, something that had been deliberately kept from her. What is it, Caspian? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, her hand instinctively reaching for the silver ring on her finger, the ring that was both a source of power and a symbol of the curse that plagued her lineage. Caspian took a deep breath, his golden eyes finally meeting hers, filled with a mixture of apprehension and regret. He knew that what he was about to tell her would change everything, would shatter her perception of the curse, of her destiny, of the very nature of the soulmate bond. The curse, he began, his voice low and serious. It's not just about controlling the shift, about suppressing the wolf within. It's more than that. He hesitated, struggling to find the right words, to explain the horrifying truth that had been hidden from her for so long. The elders, he continued, his voice strained, they didn't just curse the daughters of the first moon. They twisted the soulmate bond itself. They made it a weapon. Aloan's brow furrowed, her confusion evident. A weapon? She repeated, her voice questioning.
How?
What do you mean? Caspian swallowed hard, his gaze unwavering. The curse, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, it ensures that when the daughter of the first moon finds her soulmate, she will be forced to kill them. The words hit Aloan like a physical blow, stealing her breath, making her heart stop. She stared at Caspian, her eyes wide with disbelief, with horror, with a growing sense of despair. Kill them? She repeated, her voice trembling.
But why? How?
Caspian explained, his voice filled with a profound sadness, a deep regret for the cruel fate that awaited her, a fate that had been engineered by the fear and short-sightedness of their ancestors. The elders believed, he said, that the only way to truly control the power of the first moon, to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands, was to ensure that the daughter could never fully bond with her soulmate. They believed that the combined power of two soulmates, especially one of whom was a daughter of the first moon, was too dangerous. They wanted to maintain control. So they twisted the bond, he continued, making it a curse, a trigger. When the daughter of the first moon finds her soulmate, when the bond is complete, it will activate the curse, unleashing a surge of power, a primal rage, that will force her to kill the one she loves. Eloan felt a cold dread creep through her veins, a chilling realization of the horrifying truth. She was destined to kill her soulmate, to destroy the one person who was meant to complete her, to share her power, to help her break the curse. It was a cruel irony, a twisted paradox, a fate worse than death. But that's insane, she whispered, her voice shaking. Why would they do that? Why would they create a curse that would condemn their own descendants to such a horrific fate? Fear, Caspian said, his voice filled with a bitter understanding. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, fear of a power they couldn't comprehend. They thought they were protecting the pack, he continued, but they were only perpetuating the cycle of violence, of suffering, of isolation. They were condemning the daughters of the first moon to a life of loneliness, of loss, of despair. Eloan felt tears welling up in her eyes, tears of anger, of grief, of betrayal. She had been betrayed by her ancestors, by the very people who were supposed to protect her, to guide her, to help her fulfill her destiny. She looked at Caspian, her eyes searching his. Is there any way to prevent it? She asked, her voice filled with a desperate hope, a flicker of defiance against the cruel fate that awaited her. Caspian shook his head, his expression grim.
I don't know, he said.
The legend says that the curse can be broken, but it doesn't say how. It only says that the daughter of the first moon must find her soulmate, that their combined power is the key. But if finding my soulmate means killing them, Eloan said, her voice choked with emotion, then I don't want to find them. I'd rather be alone. I'd rather live with the curse than hurt someone I love. Caspian reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the tears that streamed down her cheeks. His touch was warm and comforting, a stark contrast to the cold dread that filled her heart. Don't say that, Eloan, he said, his voice firm. You can't give up hope. We'll find a way. We'll figure it out. We'll break this curse together. His words, his unwavering belief in her, in their ability to overcome the seemingly insurmountable obstacles, gave her a flicker of hope, a spark of defiance. But even as she clung to that hope, a dark thought crept into her mind, a terrifying realization that made her blood run cold. If the soulmate bond was a weapon, a trigger for the curse, and if she was destined to kill her soulmate, then what did that mean for her feelings for Caspian? They weren't soulmates, she knew that. But she cared about him, deeply. She trusted him, she admired him, she felt safe with him. Could the curse, in its twisted logic, mistake her feelings for him, her connection to him, for the soulmate bond? Could it force her to? She couldn't even finish the thought. It was too horrifying, too unbearable. As if reading her mind, Caspian looked deeply into her eyes.
He spoke, softly.
It won't be me, Eloan. Before she could question him further, a deafening crash of thunder and a howl pierced through the clearing. It was Alara, and she was in trouble. Chapter 19. The Heart's True North. The howl, filled with pain and desperation, cut through the night, overriding the rumble of the approaching storm. Caspian and Eloan exchanged a look of alarm, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew, without a doubt, that Alara was in danger. They raced towards the sound, their wolf senses heightened, their adrenaline surging. They burst into a small clearing, and the scene that greeted them was one of chaos and bloodshed. Alara, in her wolf form, was battling a group of hunters, her silver fur matted with blood, her movements sluggish, her strength clearly waning. But it wasn't just the hunters that posed a threat. Standing amidst them, his eyes glowing with a malevolent red light, was Reese. Reese, a member of their own pack, a werewolf who had once been their ally, was now fighting alongside the hunters, his claws and teeth tearing through Alara with a savage ferocity. Betrayal. The word echoed in Eloan's mind, a cold, Hard reality that shattered her perception of the pack, of the bonds of loyalty and trust that she had believed were unbreakable. "Reese!" Caspian roared, his voice filled with disbelief and fury. "What are you doing?" Reese turned towards them, his face contorted with rage, his eyes filled with a hatred that was both terrifying and heartbreaking. "I'm doing what should have been done long ago," Reese snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "I'm ending this curse, once and for all. I'm destroying the daughter of the first moon." He lunged towards Aloan, his claws extended, his intent clear. Caspian intercepted him, shifting into his wolf form, his golden fur bristling with anger, his growl a challenge, a promise of retribution. The two wolves clashed, a whirlwind of fur and teeth and claws, their battle a brutal dance of betrayal and vengeance. Caspian was stronger, faster, but Reese was driven by a rage, a grief, a twisted sense of justice that fueled his every move. Aloan watched them, her heart torn between horror and understanding. She understood Reese's pain, his loss, his bitterness. She understood his desire to end the curse, to prevent any more suffering, any more bloodshed. But his methods were wrong. His betrayal was unforgivable. He had sided with the hunters, with the very people who had killed his mate, with the enemies of their kind. She knew she had to stop him, to protect Caspian, to protect Alara, to protect herself. But she also knew that killing him wouldn't solve anything. It would only perpetuate the cycle of violence, of hatred, of despair. She focused on the silver ring on her finger, on the power of the first moon that flowed through it. She remembered the hunter's words, the revelation that the soulmate bond was a weapon, a trigger for the curse. She had to find a way to use that power, to control it, to channel it, not for violence, but for something else. She looked at Alara, struggling to defend herself against the remaining hunters. She looked at Caspian, locked in a deadly battle with Reese. She looked at the storm raging above them, the lightning illuminating the clearing, the thunder echoing through the trees. And then she knew what she had to do. She closed her eyes, focusing on her inner wolf, on the power of the moon, on the connection she felt to Caspian, to Alara, to the entire pack. She reached deep within herself, drawing on the ancient magic that flowed through her veins, the magic of the first moon, the magic of her ancestors. She opened her eyes, and they glowed with a fierce, determined light, a light that was not of anger, not of violence, but of love, of compassion, of hope. She stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the clearing, overriding the sounds of battle, of the storm. "Reese," she called out. "Stop. This isn't the way. This isn't what Lyra would have wanted." Reese paused, his attack faltering, his eyes flickering with doubt. He looked at Aloan, his expression a mixture of rage and pain. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Don't speak her name." "She loved you, Reese," Aloan said, her voice gentle but firm. "She would have wanted you to find peace, to find happiness, not to become this." She gestured towards the hunters, towards the carnage that surrounded them. "This isn't justice, Reese," she said. "This is revenge. And revenge will only consume you, will only perpetuate the cycle of violence, of hatred." Reese stared at her, his body trembling, his eyes filled with a conflict of emotions. He was torn between his grief, his rage, and the memory of his lost love, the faint echo of the bond they had shared. Aloan channeled the power of the ring, not as a weapon, but as a beacon, a conduit for her emotions, for her love, for her compassion. She reached out towards Reese, her hand outstretched, her heart open. "Come back to us, Reese," she said, her voice pleading. "Come back to the pack. Come back to yourself." Reese hesitated, his gaze shifting between Aloan and Caspian, between the hunters and Alara. He was at a crossroads, a turning point, a moment of decision that would determine his fate, the fate of the pack, the fate of the curse. Then, with an anguished howl that was almost a sob, Reese turned on the nearest hunter. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. Reese's sudden turn was a whirlwind of motion. He attacked the nearest hunter with a ferocity born of guilt and self-loathing, his claws and teeth tearing through flesh and bone with a brutal efficiency. The other hunters, momentarily stunned by his betrayal of them, quickly recovered and retaliated, their weapons aimed at their former ally. Caspian, seeing Rhys's change of heart, joined the fray, his golden fur flashing in the moonlight as he fought alongside his former packmate, their combined strength driving back the hunters. Eloan, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and hope, focused on Alara, who was still struggling to defend herself against the remaining hunters. She channeled the power of the ring, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a shield, a force field of protection, deflecting the hunters' blows, giving Alara a chance to recover. The battle raged, a chaotic melee of werewolves and hunters, the air thick with the scent of blood and sweat, the sounds of growls and shouts, and the clang of metal filling the clearing. But the tide had turned. With Rhys fighting alongside Caspian and Eloan, the hunters were outnumbered, outmatched, their attack faltering. One by one, the hunters fell, their bodies collapsing to the ground, their weapons clattering on the rocks. Finally, only the leader of the hunters remained, the man who had orchestrated the attack, the man who had revealed the truth about the curse. He stood there, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. He knew he was defeated, his plans thwarted, his ambition crushed. He looked at Eloan, his gaze filled with a venomous spite. "You may have won this battle," he snarled, "but you'll never win the war. The curse, it's too strong. It will consume you, just like it consumed your mother." Eloan met his gaze, her eyes unwavering, her heart filled with a quiet strength, a newfound confidence. "The curse doesn't define me," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am the daughter of the first moon, and I will choose my own destiny." She raised her hand, the silver ring on her finger glowing brightly, the power of the first moon surging through her. But she didn't use that power to attack, to destroy. She used it to heal. She focused on the injured werewolves, on Caspian, on Alara, on Rhys. She channeled the energy of the ring, directing it towards them, mending their wounds, soothing their pain, restoring their strength. The leader of the hunters watched in disbelief, his eyes widening in horror as he saw his enemies, his victims, being healed by the very power he had sought to control, to exploit. What are you doing?" he stammered, his voice filled with a desperate fear. "I'm breaking the cycle," Eloan said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm choosing love over hate, compassion over violence, hope over despair." She turned her gaze towards the hunter, her eyes filled with a pity, a sorrow for the lost and twisted soul he had become.
"And I'm giving you a choice," she said.
"You can surrender, you can atone for your crimes, you can choose a different path. Or you can continue to fight, to hate, to destroy, and you will face the consequences." The hunter hesitated, his body trembling, his eyes flickering with doubt. He was at a crossroads, a turning point, a moment of decision that would determine his fate. But his pride, his hatred, his ingrained belief in the righteousness of his cause were too strong. He couldn't surrender, he couldn't atone, he couldn't change. He lunged towards Eloan, his hand reaching for a hidden dagger, his intent clear. But before he could reach her, Rhys intercepted him, his claws striking with a deadly precision, severing the hunter's spinal cord. The hunter collapsed to the ground, his body lifeless, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. The battle was over. Silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by the sound of the receding storm, the gentle rustling of the leaves, the ragged breaths of the weary werewolves. Eloan looked at Caspian, at Alara, at Rhys. They were injured, exhausted, but they were alive. They had survived. They had won. Rhys met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of remorse and gratitude. He had betrayed them, he had fought alongside their enemies, but he had also redeemed himself. He had chosen the right path. He had returned to the pack. "I am sorry," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "For everything." Eloan nodded, her heart filled with a forgiveness, a compassion that transcended his betrayal. "We all make mistakes, Rhys," she said. What matters is that we learn from them, that we choose a better path. She turned her gaze towards Caspian, her eyes searching his. She saw the relief in his golden eyes, the gratitude, the love. She knew then, with a certainty that went beyond logic, beyond reason, beyond the curse itself, that she had found her true north, her guiding star, her heart's desire. But he was not her soulmate. The curse had made that impossible. The storm had passed. Above them, the clouds parted, revealing a sky dusted with diamond-bright stars and a full, radiant moon. Eloan looked to Caspian, questioningly. He returned her gaze and nodded. "It won't be me," he repeated from earlier. But this time, it was an affirmation, not a question. "The curse targets the soulmate bond," Eloan clarified. "But that does not mean it targets love." And finally, Caspian understood. He closed the distance between them. Epilogue. The years that followed were not easy. The search for other werewolves, for potential soulmates who could fulfill the technical requirements of the curse, was long and arduous, filled with challenges, with setbacks, with moments of despair. But Eloan never gave up hope. She traveled the world, accompanied by Caspian, by Alara, by Reese, and by other members of the growing Briarwood pack, a pack that had been reborn, cleansed of its dark past, united by a common purpose, a shared dream of a better future. They encountered other packs, some welcoming, some hostile, some wary, some curious. They shared their story, their struggle, their hope for a world where werewolves could live in peace, free from the fear of hunters, free from the shadow of the curse. And slowly, gradually, they began to build alliances, to forge connections, to create a network of support, a community of werewolves who believed in Eloan's vision, who were willing to fight alongside her, to help her break the curse, to create a new destiny for their kind. Eloan learned to control her powers, to harness the energy of the first moon, to use the silver ring not as a weapon of destruction, but as a tool of healing, of protection, of connection. She became a leader, a guide, a beacon of hope for her people. And through it all, Caspian was by her side, her constant companion, her trusted advisor, her loyal friend, her love. Their bond, though not the mystical, all-consuming connection of soulmates, was something deeper, something stronger, something that transcended the limitations of the curse, the restrictions of fate. It was a love born of shared experience, of mutual respect, of unwavering support, of a deep and abiding affection that grew stronger with each passing day. They never spoke of marriage, of formalizing their relationship. They didn't need to. Their connection was beyond words, beyond rituals, beyond the expectations of society, of the pack. They were two souls, intertwined, not by fate, but by choice, by a love that was freely given, freely received, a love that defied the curse, that defied the odds, that defied destiny itself. They eventually did find a soulmate for Eloan, a quiet, kind werewolf from a secluded pack in the mountains of Scotland. He was named Alistair. He understood the situation and the agreement. And, in a quiet moonlit ceremony, Alistair and Eloan completed the soul bond. Nothing happened. The curse was broken. And the reason, as Alara explained later, was simple. The curse targeted the soulmate bond, yes, but the magic of the first moon was far more powerful and far more ancient than those fearful elders could ever control. The first moon valued love. And so long as Eloan was loved and gave love in return, the ancient, twisted curse was nullified. Years turned into decades. Eloan and Caspian, side by side, led their pack, their community, into a new era of peace and prosperity. They had children, werewolves who inherited the power of the first moon, but without the burden of the curse, children who were free to choose their own paths, to forge their own destinies, to love whomever their hearts desired. Alara eventually passed away, peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her loved ones, her legacy secured, her wisdom passed down to the next generation. Reese, redeemed and forgiven, became a trusted elder of the pack, a mentor to the young werewolves, a living testament to the power of redemption, of second chances. And Aloan and Caspin, their hair silvered with age, their bodies weathered by time, but their hearts still filled with love, with hope, with a quiet joy, continued to walk hand in hand, under the light of the moon, their bond unbreakable, their love eternal, a testament to the enduring power of the human and werewolf spirit. The first moon had watched over them, after all. The end.